Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Stumptown. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, obviously in this episode, we still see Dex still dealing with the whole fact of, Ansel moving out. And I thought because of the way last episode kind of went down, I was like, oh, she kind of became okay with it and everything. I thought like, oh, maybe she'd be better. It's like, no, she's throwing a wild party. She's drinking a lot. She's kind of living it up and everything. And even Tuki's going over and being like, yo, what the hell is going on here? I even love her like, no. Because it's like, oh, boo, DJ. And Tuki's like, the DJ left like an hour ago. And Dex is like, wait, she did? And goes over, takes the dude who's trying to take the phone from the dude who's doing the music. And then she starts dancing. And I love Tuki. He's like, oh God, please no. Oh no, he's looking the other way like, oh, I can't look at it. I can't. I love that. But, I mean, obviously, it's a little fun, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, you can tell that's sad. It's like the sense that, like, she's partying so much because, and it's something she talks about later on, but you can definitely tell even from the beginning, it's like, she doesn't want it quiet. Like, the house is too quiet without Ansel, so she needs a whole bunch of people around to kind of distract her. She needs a distraction right now, because, I mean, it seems like these are, at least some of those people, the way she was interacting, like, these were people that she knew, but it probably makes you wonder, it's like, oh, these are people, like, she knows by association. I don't really know if there's how many, I mean, we've never actually seen much of Dex's inner circle. I mean, her inner circle seems like it's only, at this point, Hoffman, Ansel and Gray, like that's her inner circle. Like beyond that, we haven't, over the course of this series, we haven't seen any friends. I mean, I say outside of that would be Tookie. Like that's the closest thing you have to like, friends for her. So that's why I think it's kind of interesting. Like, are these real friends? Or are they more so associates? And then some of those people are associates of said associates, whatever the case may be. But it's interesting, Dex was partying it up, and literally a case literally walks into her door because her door was left wide open. That's super unsafe. But it's the whole thing of like Dex, like I said, she's drinking, trying to drown out everything that she's feeling and dealing with. And the fact of the matter is she's not as on top of everything. Once again, Ansel grounded her. He was her anchor. And now that he's gone, like she's kind of out at sea without a safety net, essentially, But this staff sergeant, Jeremy, came to Dex for help because he wants to find his real parents because he ended up finding out, like, oh, his parents have lied to him his entire life because he's actually adopted. So Dex is coming to ask questions about the parents. And I thought it was such an interesting thing because for them, it's like, because it's like, when is Jeremy going to come back? And he's like, and, Dex is trying to tell them, it's like, no, he's just, he understands because it was even something she was trying to get across. It's like, yeah, your parents love you, because it's not even a situation, because it's like, oh, well, your parent, you're not parents who are your parents. Like, what I mean is the people who adopted you, like, oh, they're bad people. It's like, no, they've been good. They've been there for him in such pivotal parts of his life. They've always made sure he went to like the best schools and everything. But it's like, this is a part of himself. He now realizes like, oh, there's another side of my family I don't know about, a part of me that I don't know. And Dex was trying to get that across to like his adoptive parents that like, hey, like he just wants to, know himself, And so, and I think that's kind of a neat element to this episode. It wasn't like, at least with Dex, it's not like she got drawn. I mean, she got drawn into kind of like a criminal thing, but it wasn't like, I feel like as big criminal, like it wasn't, I was about to say, she still ends up with a gun in her face in this episode. So but still, it's just a thing of like, it's still a very like small personal story, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of her cases are literally her last case was as well. But you get what I'm trying to say. It's just, I think it's a very like low, like much, smaller story, and just kind of like it is a very like family story that I think, and I think it's kind of a neat element. I mean, obviously that's an element that she's been dealing with more recently, so it kind of makes sense. The last episode dealt with family, and now this one's kind of dealing with that as well. Because basically Dex starts looking into Jeremy's, and she goes to try to pick up, like, look into the, and I love that lady running that place. It's kind of like, you have to do numbers, and the guy was like walking up there. He's like, finally. She's like, just because of that, you're in detention. He's like, wait, I've been waiting here for hours. I know the lady tried to bring donuts, but it's like, those aren't, what was it, vegan donuts or whatever. It was like so it's like, okay, but Dex kind of took advantage of it. It's like, oh, here are these specific donuts that you want, plus a coffee. It's like, can you help me out and everything? It's like, oh, Dex is, kind of learning from everyone else's mistakes to kind of help herself out in that regard. So I thought that was kind of pretty neat. And I thought it was kind of interesting because it's like, okay, so a lot of the adoption files are sealed, which even she called Hoffman. Even Hoffman was like, all of them being sealed is kind of weird and interesting. So taking this opportunity, she goes visits this church that was connected to this adoption agency. It turns out that adoption agency got shut down like 6 years ago. She shows up at church. I was actually halfway expecting that church to be more of a plot point than it was necessarily. I thought she was going, well, she comes back there a second time, but never it was never like a bigger plot point than I thought it would be. But especially because that lady shows up and it's like, oh, you're asking questions about that? Oh, don't worry about that. I'm like, oh, yeah, like your responses, Betty, looks super shady. And I even love that guy being like, oh, you can leave now. And Dex be like, oh, Jesus, like, don't sneak up on me like that. You scared the crap out of me. It's like, yeah, you quick to push me out the door. It's like, yeah, definitely tell you up to some shady stuff. But I do like that Dex did come back in the church later on, and she's like kind of, not used to this whole thing. She was like, so how do I handle this? And there was actually this moment, it was like a very deep moment that Dex had. It kind of was like, it's actually sad that she kind of holds on to this. Is for her, it's a whole thing of like, she's like, I said that if you're having like making everything happen so that, Ansel wants to move out because I said one time, I don't want to take care of him because she was even like trying to explain. I was like, it wasn't him. It was my parents. I was frustrated at. She's like, I don't mean that. Like, if that's the reason, like, then I didn't mean that. So please don't, and it's like, it's so sad that in her mind, she thinks like, because she said that one time, it's like, oh, this is me being punished because I said it at one point in my life when you were frustrated. You're a person, you want to live your own life. You don't want to be responsible for your own sibling. But now in the grand scheme of things, and I think, it's understandable. It's just like, you probably at a point in your life, she probably was like much younger and, you're probably like a teenager or something at that time. It's kind of like, oh, you want your own independence. It's like, oh, I got to babysit my baby brother. That type of situation. But it's like, because obviously Dex loves him and cherishes him. So it's like, but I think in her mind, like she still holds on to like, I'm a bad sister. I said it one time, and I'm sure that's something plenty of siblings have said at one point in time or another. It's not, but it's just sad that she kind of holds that against herself. Because, because like I said, she's still holding on to him, like, goes over there. It's like, oh, great, I want to get some coffee. He's like, you got coffee at your own place. It's like Ansel's the one who fixed the coffee, showing that obviously, he's like I said, he didn't just keep her grounded. He kept her together. He kept her sane. Like I said, when like Dex is probably like falling apart, like he was there to kind of basically help pick her up. She kind of kept herself together because it's like, I need to keep my shit together so I'm like in the right mindset to look after my little brother. Like obviously there was stuff here and there, but she would never let it fully take away from her commitment of looking after Ansel, and even hearing Ansel be like, oh no, I got like, oh, this stuff I want to work on. She's like, oh, you want me to help you? It's like, no, like this is guy stuff, and now we get context to that later on, but I'll get to that, eventually. But it was just interesting kind of getting that insight and everything. And obviously, having to break the news to Jeremy, it's like, oh, your mom died like 3 months ago, which for him, it's like, if my parents had told me sooner, then maybe I could have gotten to know her before she died. But then you have, this whole thing of, Dex trying to be like, your adoptive parents couldn't afford seeing something like that happening. Like, cut them some slack. It's like, could we all kind of have a tendency where we get to a point where we kind of think like our parents are kind of, bad people, but at the end of the day, they're humans. They make mistakes, And so it was interesting because we finally got some, because I've been wondering the entire time, because it comes up from time to time, but like Dex doesn't like talking about her parents. I was so curious what the case may be, and it's like oh, because he was like, you talk about your parents like they were terrible, and she's like, oh, they were. When I was deployed, they left Ansel and put him in a home, and I'm like, whoa. So that's why she cherishes Ansel so tightly, because it's like all that went down while she was away. It's like, and she hasn't seen her parents since. I was like, I can understand why you don't like talking about them, but that's also why you cherish Ansel even more. Probably because in her mind, that's what she probably associates. Because I didn't want to look after him, and the moment I turned my back, what happened? My brother almost was in the system. Like like, the fact of the matter is, all that he went, like, so I think that's probably what sparked it in her to, like, I'm gonna protect him, because, like, she's afraid to take her eyes off it, so, because she's afraid, like, if I leave him again, I might lose him, you know, like, she felt like that before, but now we had the context of, like, your parents abandoned him for whatever reason. Maybe they have some reason, you know, like, who are we to judge? You know, humans make mistakes, but it's like, the fact is, the entire time they haven't reached out, you know, because even Dex was like, I haven't seen them since. It makes you wonder, have they actually reached out, but Dex hasn't really wanted to listen, or have they just, like, what happened? Maybe it was a situation of, maybe they left, but maybe they were going to come back, but they died or something. I don't know, because Dex would have gotten something about that if they had died, so they're still out there somewhere. Part of me wonders, like, just in the context of the story, we might get a twisted thing where it's like they actually went off and started another family. You know, sadly, situations potentially happen like that. It's like, oh, I wasn't ready at the time to be a mom. Ansel situation, we weren't well prepared, but for whatever reason, now you're willing to have a family, but you never went back to your own, you know, it's like, oh, like, it might be a thing of, like, we made too many mistakes, we weren't ready, we felt like we made too many mistakes, there was no going back, so we decided just to go forward. It might be that type of thing. Like I said, we'll ultimately have to, you know, wait and see. But it was like, that was some interesting insight to kind of get as well. But then we find out, you know, Dex finds Jeremy's dad, Tim. And, you know, Tim and Jeremy spend a little time together. We don't get to see it, but Tim is like, yeah, I got to leave town. And, you know, but Dex is like, no, if you're going to leave, don't ask me to tell him. You tell him. But for him, it's like, I'd rather disappoint him now than stay in his life and be a disappointment. But he brings it up. The fact is, it's like Jeremy's mom, Sherry, it's like the people saying she's a drug user and all this and that. It's like, no, that's not the woman I knew. She was very straight-laced. She would never do something like that. The reason why I gave up parental rights is because I was a screw-up, but Sherry was a model mom. Like, anyone that says she wasn't a good mom, that's why I wholeheartedly left, you know, Jeremy in her hands. And so now it turns into a thing of, like, yeah, like, now she starts looking, that starts looking a little deeper into this. She actually talks to Sue Lin, and then it turns out there's actually a little bit more of a conspiracy with this whole situation. That the fact is that they basically, that group, that adoption agency / thing was like, it did this repeatedly. It would take Native American, it would almost pinpoint specific, like, Native American families that might have been easier to kind of push around and kind of take their children from it and give them to parents. To other parents who are unbeknown, like, not knowing the full context of everything. And Dex ends up confronting Betty, and it's kind of sad. It's like, because for her, she uses the line of, like, oh, I'm taking them and putting them in pure families, and I'm like, that, it didn't really come up. I'm like, that sounded like some bigoted shit, that, like, just because they were Native Americans, you're like, oh, they're gonna come from, like, a messed up home, and I'm like, I'm putting them in a pure good home, which makes me just all I hear when I hear pure, I'm like, all I hear is white. That's kind of what I hear. I could be wrong, but that's what I mean. She also comes from it's the Christian thing to do. And Christian thing to do is take someone's children away from them, claiming them to be bad parents, because she was kind of I forgot what Dex had said, like, her profession was, but she was kind of in this world, so she's the one to kind of set stuff in motion of, like, oh, these people are unfit parents. So, and it's like, the reason why they would do that is because they would get kickbacks from the whole situation because of, like, the adoption stuff. Parents would get, like, tax stuff that ended up leading to kickbacks to them. So it's like, that's what this was all about. But Betty was like, no, it's not like that. It's, you know, but it's like, it totally was like that. So that dude tried to put a gun in Dex's face. She's like, all right, I got this. Takes the gun, takes the dude down, does the badass thing of, like, unloading the gun. I'm like, yo, and just kind of walking away from like a badass. I don't know if we got the context of what else went down with that. Like, I'm sure she probably gave it to the cops, because they didn't mention, like, the aftermath of that, but still, you know, Dex, you know, having to sit down with Jeremy and his parents about this whole thing, and it's like, they had some feelings at the very least, but they were so desperate to have kids, they weren't really going to ask any questions. And it's a thing of, like, obviously for Jeremy, it's a hard thing of kind of accepting, because it's like, they kind of helped take me from my mom. Like I said, his mom was kind of painted as being a bad person, like, oh, she's this drug addict, she overdosed and stuff like that, because, because I don't think that was ever taken away from like the fact is that she had overdosed. I think it is a thing of like, but that was after her child was stolen from her and like her world had kind of fallen apart, you know. So it was a byproduct of that. Like she was never like that before, but they try to spin it to make it seem like she was. Hence why her child was taken from her, even though that wasn't the case at all. You know, so, you know, just kind of showing like the flawed system of making sure stuff like that doesn't end up happening. But I think, you know, Jeremy doesn't hate his parents, but it makes things complicated, you know. And even Jeremy had asked, you know, Dex is like, if your parents came back into your life, would you just accept them? Which she's like, our situation is different, which yes, it is. But it's still the thing of like, because I think Dex is right to tell him to kind of forgive his family. It's like they made a mistake, but those are still your parents. They looked after you. They loved you. They didn't know the entire context of everything that was going down. They were kind of, you know, they were used in this situation as well, you know. So, but there was a beautiful silver lining to all of this. Sulin introduces Jeremy to his mom's side of the family. I mean, that also still means just because of the whole complicated thing with his dad, maybe his dad can shape up and eventually, you know, get back into his life, and maybe it's be a situation of maybe he'd eventually get to know his dad's side of the family. But in this moment, it's still this nice thing of like, okay, he didn't get to know his mom, but now he gets to know his mom's side of the family, you know, meet his cousin, his aunt, and, you know, his uncle, you know, it's a beautiful, you know, thing, you know. So, you know, I thought that was kind of nice. So I think Dex, you know, despite her family situation, being able to kind of reunite, you know, expand his family, it's like, despite your complicated family situation, you got a lot of people who love you, people on your mom's side of the family, as well as your adopted parents. They love you very much. So, you know, I thought that was just kind of a nice thing. And obviously, you know, the conversation with Tookie and Dex at the end I thought was interesting, because for him it's like, you know, are you going to be throwing any more parties? And she's like, no. And for, like I said, she had brought up the fact that the quiet kind of reminds her of her time over there, which I'll get to that soon enough. But, you know, Tookie is like, the fact of the matter is the quiet isn't, you know, too bad. Like, the fact is you could use this as an opportunity to kind of learn to kind of be on your own. Like I said, she ends up, you know, because at one point in the episode, she did clean up the house. She was blasting music just so she wouldn't have to like be trapped with her own thoughts. But Jeremy did try to tell her like, hey, come to, like, you know, this, like a whole bunch of veterans would be there. Like, for her, she doesn't want to be in that position. I think it's a whole therapy thing sometimes. Like, it's a meeting. She wouldn't want to go there to, you know, talk about her feelings. It's just not Dex. She kind of internalizes a lot of stuff. She bottles a lot of stuff up, and she doesn't want to just talk about her feelings and stuff like that, you know. And that's a big issue for Dex, you know. And I think, sadly, that's something, you know, that's kind of reflected in many vets of just like the stuff that they've seen and what they've been through. They probably don't want to talk about that. Like, you know, because they don't want to, I guess they feel like they might be burdening other people with it. Because even Jeremy immediately noticed the signs, because of just like they heard kind of a bang and she kind of jumped and he saw her hand twitching a little bit. You know, he's had friends that kind of went through stuff. It's like, yeah, maybe I seen some things, or maybe I've been through some stuff, but maybe, you know, it's nothing that's kind of left me like that. But I've seen friends who go through that. So it's like ignoring it isn't a good thing. And what does Dex continue to do? Ignore it. But we do see at the end she's looking at the card, so she is thinking about it. So you hope that she does end up talking to somebody instead of keeping it all bottled up, because obviously that's stuff that even she hasn't talked to Gray about, and that shows you that even people within her inner circle still aren't, you know, she still keeps them at a distance as well, you know. So I also thought it was kind of, you know, the whole Gray and Ansel thing was sweet, because it's like, oh, like he wants piece to put together like a chair, he wants to change a tire, he wants to make burgers and stuff like that, but because it's a list of things, and it's like, oh, because now he's 21, drink a beer and all that, and then it's like, oh, like he wants to ask a girl out, but it's like, oh, I get it, because Gray starts figuring out, like, everything he's done on his list has been because he wants to, you know, prove himself to be like a man. Like, if it's like, oh, if I do all this stuff that, you know, he thinks that, oh, this is manly stuff, because it's stuff he's seen Gray do it, because in his mind it's like, oh, Gray's a guy, Gray's a man, so it's like, oh yeah, like, if I do what he's done, then I'll be a man, and then I can ask a girl out. It's just because he's trying to build up the confidence and stuff. But also you can see like Gray is like the first male figure he's probably had in his life growing up. You know, considering his parents weren't there, and particularly his dad wasn't there. So I think Ansel looks at Gray as probably a combination, well, just as a representation of like, oh yeah, like this is a man. This is what a man is supposed to be, like what a man represents. But also probably looks at him kind of like almost like a borderline father figure, but probably more so like an older brother, type of situation. So, but I like what Gray had told him of like the fact of the matter is he knows plenty of people who can't do half the things on that list, and it's like that puts you above 75% of men in this world or whatever. But the fact of the matter is it's someone who keeps their promises when they're going to do something. It's not have to be like these big extravagant things. It's that person who's willing to do those small things. He's like, for example, making coffee for your sister Dex. It's like it's those things, and he's like, that's proof enough that you are a man. You don't have to kind of live by some standard of like, oh, this is what it takes to be a man. Like you've proven yourself. Like you don't need some list to go through a list to ask a girl out. Like you be confident in yourself and just ask her out. So that also adds the element of like, I think it's a combination of wanting his own independence, but I think he also thought like if he lived on his own, then it's like, oh, that's more of like, oh, I'm a man and everything, but I think it is more so an independence thing. He wants to, because like I said, Dex kind of holds him tight, but that's just because of what they went through. And I think maybe Ansel doesn't really look at, he was probably super young at the time, so he probably doesn't correlate everything the same way Dex does. Dex probably has a very different perspective on it than Ansel because he was young and probably didn't really understand the context of everything. But maybe now he's older, he probably does. I don't know. I would be curious to kind of, dive into that, more so. But like I was saying, that kind of makes sense why later on, earlier he was like, oh, Dex asked if she could help, but he was like, no, this is guy stuff because of that whole, what he thought would be like a definition of manly. And I think, once again, that's why he probably wants to get a little further away from Dex because he thinks like, oh, like, like I said, he wants to be, like I said, it's a combination of the two. It's just a combination of a lot of stuff. I thought that was just kind of interesting, kind of diving into that with Ansel. And then the other side of things is the whole Gray and Hoffman situation. Once again, it's always one step forward, two steps back with them because it's like, oh, hey, all right, we'll be working together, which I love Gray is like, yeah, I've heard, I went to jail with some snitches and some informants. And the fact is you get like 13% of a bust. I'm like, is that real? Or is that just some BS that they gave off? Because I'm like, I've watched quite a few crime dramas. I've never heard that before. This is the first time I've ever heard that. Like, I didn't know that was a thing. I think that's kind of interesting. But regardless of all that, the fact is that Gray is going undercover and everything. I love that. What was his dude named? I'm blanking. He was like the main dude that Gray met first. He set Gray up to he made. It was a reference to the movie My Cousin Vinny. I've never seen that movie before. I was like, oh, I've heard the movie. I've seen its titling. I've just never sat down to actually watch the movie. But regardless, he gets in, but he has to steal a car first. They're like, oh, we'll give you one. It secretly has a tracker on it. I was like, oh, that's not good. Then he meets the rest of the crew. In particular, one of the other mains being Max. She checks out the car, and I'm like, oh, the way Gray was looking, I was like, no, he already got the tracker off. But he probably wants some, I guess he was kind of worried, like maybe there'll be like some residual, something to kind of say that there was something there. I don't know. But I'm like, nah, you found the tracker, didn't you? And good thing he did. Because legitimately, if Hoffman hadn't, because Hoffman was like, oh, I did a very good job of finding it. It's like, but legitimate, you got to admit, if Gray was able to find it, that means these people, I mean, to be fair, like, Hoffman is kind of underestimated because it's like, honestly, they would have killed him. Like, that's something, I feel like Hoffman didn't really take the time to really take the gravitas of that whole situation. Like, yeah, they would have killed him if they had found that tracker, but in his mind it's like they would have never found it. It was like, well, Gray put himself in a position where he didn't have to worry about that potentiality. So side note, the actress who plays Max, she seems so familiar and I can't place where. I have to look into it, but I don't know what I know her from. She looks so familiar. But the fact of the matter is, Gray kind of hits it off with the team. There's some driving around, meets the head honcho of this whole this group, and it's Leo. And now it turns into, obviously that, like I said, that whole tracker thing was an issue between Hoffman and Gray, because it turns into a whole thing of, Gray thinking it's like, yo, like, oh, I know, like, Hoffman, like, you're very by the rules and stuff like that. Oh, let me guess, like, yeah, your family, were kind of cops or whatever, and your dad wants you to be chief or whatever, so you're trying to be so squeaky clean. It's almost like you need someone to kind of get into the muck, into the dirty stuff, so you can keep your hands clean, and that's why I'm here. That's what role I am in. But he's like, if I want to, I could drop you. He's like, if you want to drop me, Hoffman, go right ahead, but you can't because you need me. You need me more than I need you in this situation, which, fact is, Hoffman didn't drop him, proves that is true. It does seem interesting, like they're setting Max up to be kind of like the adrenaline junkie of kind of like, oh, life is boring if you're not, taking some risk. Where's the fun in that if there's not stealing a car in broad daylight without kind of doing more like distractions and stuff like that, But it's also the thing that, it does seem like there's a bridge being built between Hoffman and Gray, because he was like, yeah, you don't know me. The fact of the matter is, he's like, I was undercover for a long time, and it is a thing of like being undercover for 5 years. You can't go without getting your hands dirty. So the fact of the matter is, he doesn't think that he's squeaky clean either, but it does seem like, hey, there is more line of communication. It's like, yeah, Gray did steal the car, but he did inform Hoffman about it afterwards. So it's like, we are kind of in this together. So it is kind of like, and like I said, slowly but surely they are building that bridge together. So, but he also had to remind him, like, it's hard work being undercover because you get associated with these people. You kind of start almost kind of get sucked into that world, thinking of like friends and stuff like that. But these people aren't your friends. You're going to have to get close to them, sure, but they aren't your friends. They're these criminals. The fact is, even using Max, for example, saying like, when it's all said and done, with all the accounts of stuff that she's going away for, she'll be going away for at least 30 years. So don't get it twisted in a sense of like starting to care about these people. They are criminals. You're there to take them down. But that's the thing. Like, the job is to get close to them, and that closeness can cloud your judgment. And it seemed like he was almost trying to talk Max out of this whole thing, because I think he felt bad. He was like, because I think he found a little bit of a kinship with Max, just because, personality wise, they kind of clicked and everything. But I think for him, it's like, do you ever think about kind of like getting outside of this, having a family, just kind of living this life behind? But for her, it's like, why? Like, because, living a regular life was boring. But obviously for Gray, that means a lot to him. I think he probably thinks about that a lot because of Ansel and, Dex, but maybe he just thought about it in general. I mean, obviously he wanted a fresh start with the whole bad alibi thing, considering all the Kane stuff, which I'm sure that's going to circle back and around, because he's claiming to have like connections in prison and stuff like that. Which, because the way the episode ends, which it also shows that Leo and Max are a thing, so it's kind of like, oh, so it seems like there was a little bit of flirtation between Max and, Gray, but it's kind of established like, oh, they're a couple. But it almost seems like Max is just kind of like she seems reluctant with the relationship, or just kind of like, yeah, because it almost seems like he kind of treats Max more like property, like, yeah, this is my girl, this is my woman, like, that's how it kind of seems. We'll see. But they ended up they ended up stealing a truck that ended up having coke on, or I think they said cocaine, which, like, okay, which is never a good thing when you find a truck full of it, because that means that's someone else's stuff you're stealing. We're talking, you never want to get mixed up in stuff like that, because it's like, oh, and now they're like, oh, use your connections to try and sell this, which my brain, like I said, because of the whole Kane thing, I'm like, that has something to do with Kane, doesn't it? Like, or even if it doesn't have something to do with Kane, some other big time criminals are going to come after all of you because of that. So it's just the situation. No matter how this ends up flying, it's not going to end well. I think for most, if not all of this group, it's not going to end well. And obviously, the whole problem, and it doesn't come up yet, but I'm sure it will, because the whole Kane situation kind of bled over to the whole Ansel and Dex, situation. So I'm wondering if this undercover work is going to do the same thing. Probably not. We'll have to, see in the long run. But I am curious to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about till the next time with me. Be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.